In today's video, we're looking at Karen influencers that died in stupid ways. From a Karen who turns a refund argument into a full-blown public meltdown, to a wellness influencer Karen who refuses to wear a helmet while riding a quad bike, ending in the dumbest way ever. It was September 3, 2017. By late afternoon, a roadside gas station in Shenzhen, China had become the site of a medical emergency that began over a returned bag of crackers. Lena Odenkirk was 32. Originally from suburban Ohio, was an American lifestyle influencer living in Shenzhen on a work visa she had long since repurposed. She had spent 6 years in retail before leaving, cashier and floor supervisor positions that left her deeply familiar with store policy. That background became the premise of an online content channel where she filmed disputes with business staff, narrated confrontations directly to her camera, and positioned herself as a consumer advocate. That afternoon, Lena stopped to refuel and picked up a bag of imported crackers from the station's interior convenience counter. She either threw away or consumed most of the contents before returning to the register and requesting a refund, citing the product as stale. The cashier declined, pointing to a no-return policy on opened food items posted behind the counter. That was the start of it. Within 2 minutes of the refusal, Lena was already filming. She narrated the interaction to her phone's camera, raised her voice, and knocked items from a nearby rack. Staff called a supervisor. She moved outside, planted herself in front of a vehicle at the pump lane, and blocked it until drivers honked. She returned inside moments later. The supervisor had not yet arrived. 2 customers and a delivery driver were present in the shop. The cashier had not moved from behind the counter. Lena approached the display case and struck its side panel with the base of her palm. Once, then again. Witnesses said she hit the same location 3 to 4 more times without pausing. On the 4th or 5th blow, the glass fractured along the lower edge seam. The panel did not shatter outward. It collapsed inward in large, uneven pieces, suggesting it was not a standard tempered panel. Her right arm followed through the motion before she could stop it. A jagged edge of broken glass sliced across the underside of her right forearm at the wrist. The cut penetrated deeply, severing the radial artery and likely damaging adjacent vascular structures, tearing through surrounding soft tissue down to the bone. She recoiled through the frame, jerking backward as the edge cut further. Blood followed immediately, gushing from the wound and smearing darkly across the broken glass, dripping onto her clothes and the concrete beneath her. She fell down to the ground near the entrance, sliding slightly as arterial blood pulsed violently with each heartbeat, spreading rapidly across the floor. The cashier screamed sharply, while a nearby customer ran to his car and returned with a towel, pressing it firmly against the wound in an attempt to staunch the flow. Instead of accepting assistance, Lena resisted, repeatedly pulling her arm away and preventing sustained pressure from being applied, continuing her tirade in high-pitched, incoherent shouting. The bleeding did not slow within several minutes of the injury. Her movements slowed, her shouts lost coherence, and she stopped responding entirely, slumping further to the ground. Paramedics arrived approximately 11 minutes later, following a call from one of the motorists. Resuscitation efforts were initiated immediately on scene, including chest compressions and attempts to control the hemorrhage, but the extent of the trauma made revival impossible. After several minutes, resuscitation was discontinued. Lena Odenkirk was pronounced dead. Cause of death was acute hemorrhagic shock resulting from traumatic laceration of the radial artery and adjacent structures of the right wrist. Lena's online accounts went inactive within days of the incident. Several weeks later, a family member posted a short public message asking that her account will shortly be deleted. No criminal charges were filed against station staff. The case was officially closed as an accidental death. It was June 18, 2015, and the afternoon heat sat flat over the outskirts of Perm, Russia, where a municipal zoo had been quietly deteriorating for years. Maris Koval, 31, had not come to observe animals. She had come to film herself near them, and she would not leave the same way she arrived. Maris was Latvian-born micro-influencer and had spent several months living in Western Russia, steadily building a modest online following around what she called fearless living. Her content was consistent, safety warnings dismissed, restricted zones entered. She approached stray animals on city streets, walked through construction barriers, and narrated each act as evidence that fear was manufactured by institutions to control behavior. She had roughly 12,000 followers. She had no background in animal behavior, wildlife management, or anything adjacent to it. The zoo had been operating on a reduced municipal budget for over a decade. Concrete barriers along the big cat enclosures showed visible surface cracking. Warning signs had faded past the point of easy legibility. Fencing repairs were patchwork and inconsistent, leaving irregular gaps in sections of wire mesh. Maris began filming near the big cat enclosures, pointing her camera at the infrastructure and telling her audience the animals inside were misunderstood. She identified the gap between the outer barrier and the inner wire fence on camera and called it proof that posted warnings were theater. Several bystanders called out for her to stop. An older man moved toward a staff member near the path. Maris began a heated back and forth, gesturing aggressively, insisting that the zoo was overreacting, that the animals were harmless. She berated the man for wasting his time, challenged the staff member to prove her wrong, and ignored any attempts to reason with her. The conversation escalated as she leaned over the edge of the barrier, fingers pointed, voice rising, refusing to step back. She climbed over the outer barrier into the restricted buffer zone and moved to the inner wire fence. She crouched and extended her right arm through a wider section of the mesh. The tiger had been pacing the fence line for several minutes before this, likely due to the noise. The animal closed the distance in a single forward motion. Its jaws locked onto her forearm through the mesh, pressing the limb flat against the metal. The force of the initial impact drove her upper body into the fence. The tiger began moving its head side to side, a motion consistent with how large cats subdue and tear prey, applying simultaneous crushing pressure and lateral force. Blood reached the fence and the concrete behind her within seconds. Maris screamed once, sharply, and then her voice dropped off. The tiger did not reposition. It held the grip and continued the tearing motion, the mesh pressing into the wound site as the arm was worked against the barrier. Witnesses remained outside the buffer zone. No civilian intervention was possible given the arm's position through the fence. A zoo employee activated the emergency alarm, while another retrieved a high-pressure hose used for enclosure cleaning. Sustained water directed at the tiger's head and shoulders caused the animal to release and move several feet back into the enclosure. Maris collapsed against the fence. Staff contacted emergency services immediately, but blood loss was not controllable in the field. They could only pronounce her dead at the scene. The coroner identified the cause of death as traumatic hemorrhagic shock, resulting from severe crush and avulsion injuries to the right arm, compounded by blunt force chest trauma. No intact soft tissue structures remained in the affected limb. In the months following, local animal welfare organizations renewed calls for updated infrastructure at aging public facilities, not because the enclosure had failed, but because the buffer zone had been designed for people who observed its boundaries. It was April 14th, 2016. The cliffs of Moher had absorbed Atlantic wind for thousands of years, and on that Tuesday morning the gusts came in sustained, directional bursts that bent the gorse flat and sent paper cups skittering across the visitor center plaza. Loren Nunez, 29, had grown up in Albuquerque and started professionally as a freelance outdoor photographer before becoming a travel influencer. She framed herself as an explorer, pushing back against the sanitizing of wild places, and her audience rewarded it consistently. She had listed the cliffs of Moher as a target for over a year, specifically the sections beyond the barriers where the unobstructed cliff face could be captured without crowds. She traveled with professional camera equipment, planned arrival times around light conditions, and had researched the site's staffing patterns in advance. She had budgeted 2 full days on site. The upper shelf edges are composed of flagstone and shale, porous formations that accumulate biofilm under overcast, damp conditions, developing a thin algae layer that eliminates surface friction without appearing wet to the eye. On the morning of April 14th, the rock beyond the barriers had been wet since before dawn. Lauren left the designated path within 20 minutes of arriving. A staff member intercepted her and explained the zone beyond the barrier was closed due to wind. According to staff reports and multiple bystander accounts, she told him the barrier was designed for people who didn't know what they were doing, demanded to know under what legal authority she was being stopped, and told him the park was treating paying visitors like children. She said she had been to more dangerous places and nothing had happened. 2 additional staff members approached over the next 20 minutes and received the same. She filmed all 3 interactions. Tourists nearby had begun recording as well. She stepped over the waist-high barrier while still filming. She positioned herself on a natural rock shelf roughly 4 feet wide, approximately 15 feet past the barrier, sloped toward the ocean. She adjusted her footing once, then held her phone out to frame the shot. The site's weather station logged a 52-mile-per-hour crosswind gust along the cliff face at that moment. Her left shoe lost contact with the rock first. The slope angled her weight toward the edge as she tried to step right to correct. The correction failed. Her arms came up and out. She went backward, not over the face, but out, away from the cliff entirely, into open air. The fall covered approximately 600 feet. Witnesses on the path saw her body strike a rock outcrop roughly 200 feet below the cliff top. The impact produced a sudden, visible change in the body's direction and rotation before the fall continued. Several people who had been filming stopped at that point. The sound reached the footpath a fraction of a second after the visual. Wave action covered the surface within moments. Park staff contacted emergency services immediately. A Coast Guard unit arrived within 15 minutes, but sea conditions along the base of the cliffs delayed recovery for several hours. Her body was located and brought ashore that afternoon. Coroner findings noted massive blunt force trauma, consistent with high-velocity impact against rock, including catastrophic skeletal fractures and extensive organ rupture throughout the torso and cranial structure. Water entry occurred post-mortem. Cause of death was recorded as multiple traumatic injuries from a fall from height. Footage recorded by bystanders circulated on multiple platforms before removal. Among the clips preserved briefly was the one Loren filmed of herself crossing the barrier. It had uploaded automatically before the fall. The park expanded physical signage and reinforced barrier sections at several high-exposure overlooks in the months following. A local government discussion about criminal penalties for barrier violations was raised, but did not advance to legislation. Her account went private under family management not long after. It was November 22, 2018, and the evening rush at a suburban commuter station on Mumbai's Western Line had already packed the platform to capacity. Bodies pressed together, the air thick with diesel exhaust and the metallic groan of incoming carriages. Ria Dastan, 35, was from Pune, who had relocated to Mumbai 8 months prior to expand her online presence. She was an urban social commentary influencer focused on video essays filmed in crowded public spaces, transit hubs, markets, government offices, where she narrated what she called institutional passivity and social dysfunction. Her videos circulated in niche urban commentary circles and had earned her a small but engaged following. She had built a reputation for engineering situations designed to provoke a reaction, then narrating over the footage with deliberate calm. According to witnesses and security cameras, she had scouted the station twice the prior week. Apparently, her plan was to descend onto the track, deliver her lines against the backdrop of an approaching train, and step clear before it arrived. She descended from the platform's southern end onto the active track bed, positioning herself just beside the nearest rail. Several commuters immediately called out from the platform. Instead of moving, she turned toward them and launched into a heated back and forth, berating the bystanders for wasting their time and challenging anyone to stop her. Her voice rose over the crowd, defiant and combative, dismissing any warnings. Mumbai's western suburban rail corridor is one of the densest commuter systems on the planet, moving upward of 7 million passengers daily on tracks that see intervals of under 3 minutes at peak hour. Incoming electric rakes approach station platforms at reduced but still significant speeds, typically between 25 and 35 miles per hour, with emergency braking distances that can extend beyond 300 feet depending on load and rail condition. The approaching train's horn had been sounding for several seconds before Ria appeared to register it. Witnesses on the platform described the train entering the station with its brakes already engaged, the wheels producing a sustained metallic squeal audible over the ambient crowd noise. The motorman had spotted her from well outside the station and applied emergency braking immediately. Multiple commuters were shouting. Several were recording on their phones. A railway worker near the northern end had already begun running. Ria was still arguing. The train was approximately 90 feet away and moving at an estimated 20 miles per hour. She moved laterally at the last moment, one sideways step, but her timing was off. The front left corner of the lead carriage struck her at the right shoulder and upper chest. The impact was audible from the far end of the platform. The force spun her counterclockwise. She did not fall clear. Her lower torso made contact with the leading bogie assembly as the train continued through its braking sequence. She was pulled under and dragged along the track bed for several meters. The train came to a full stop after traveling approximately 40 feet past the point of contact. A visible trail extended behind it. Blood, fabric fragments, and material from her bag distributed along the track surface and the concrete edge of the track bed. Her body came to rest partially beneath the stopped carriage. The platform had gone almost completely silent. silent. Several commuters turned away. A man near the center of the crowd sank against the wall. The railway worker who had been running reached the platform edge and stopped. Station control was notified within seconds by platform staff, but it was too late. She was obviously deceased. The coroner's report noted catastrophic crush injuries to the right shoulder, thoracic cavity, and pelvic region, consistent with high-velocity lateral impact, followed by compression and drag trauma from a moving bogie assembly. The incident was logged briefly in Internal Transit Authority records and appeared in a single regional news brief the following morning. Her name was not widely circulated. The track section was returned to service within 2 hours. It was March 4th, 2022, at a mid-sized leather processing facility on the industrial outskirts of Milan, Italy, a building where the air is chemically dense before you reach the door, and where the distance between a marked barrier and something irreversible is measured in inches. Chiara Benet was 35 and based in London, running a lifestyle content account built around organic products and what she called intentional living. Her following sat near 4,000. Her reputation among business owners was a documented pattern, arriving unannounced, filming without consent, threatening condemnation unless given free access or product. Based on her online footprint, she had likely identified this tannery through a supplier tag on a luxury brand's post and traveled to Milan for a stated content series on European manufacturing. She arrived without an appointment. The security gate held her. A staff member explained in Italian and broken English that entry required prior authorization and a signed liability waiver. She filmed the exchange and posted it before clearing the entrance. A junior employee without the authority to formally deny her eventually let her through to prevent the confrontation from worsening in view of the gate and against internal site protocol, requiring escorted visitor denial enforcement. Chiara had been on the processing floor under 8 minutes when a supervisor attempted to redirect her from the VAT-level walkway. She stepped around him and ducked under a safety chain at waist height. 2 workers followed her up the grating stairs, one calling for the floor supervisor by radio. She was still filming and narrating into her phone when her left foot landed on a section of grating saturated with chemical runoff and industrial wash water that had pooled unevenly across the mesh surface. The slip gave no warning. Her foot lost traction on the wet, residue-slick platform surface, and she stumbled forward in a sudden, uncontrolled step, her upper body pitching down as her core tried to compensate for the abrupt shift in balance. Her hands came up almost immediately in an instinctive reflex to stabilize herself, but the movement was slightly mistimed, and her fingers only brushed the railing without establishing a firm grip. Her forward momentum increased over the next fraction of a second as her trailing foot failed to recover under her center of mass, effectively removing any remaining base of support. She made brief, partial contact with the platform lip, not enough to arrest or redirect her motion, and that momentary impact only altered her trajectory slightly rather than stopping it. The railing, positioned above waist height, offered no effective catch point during the downward pitch. The fall developed as a single continuous movement, with no visible recovery attempt succeeding once her balance line had passed beyond the platform threshold. She fell in the vat. The 2 workers at the top of the stairs reached the railing within 2 seconds. One triggered the emergency stop alarm mounted to the railing post. The other ran to the shutdown panel at the base of the stairs. Neither entered the water. The surface agitated briefly from the initial disturbance and from the pressure shift caused by safety system activation beneath the platform. The mechanical circulation system ran approximately 4 more seconds before the shutdown reached floor-level components. Then, the surface settled into a flat, controlled stillness. The floor supervisor called emergency services at 11:14 a.m. A fire and hazmat team arrived at 11:51 a.m. Recovery required full chemical protective equipment and extended several hours into the afternoon. The coroner's report listed cause of death as chemical immersion fatality, consistent with acute exposure to industrial alkaline solution, causing severe chemical burns, rapid tissue destruction, and fatal systemic shock, with no medically supported conclusion of complete tissue dissolution or skeletal degradation in the immediate time frame described. Time of death was estimated at point of entry. The facility was suspended pending an occupational safety review. No criminal charges were filed against staff. 2 workers took extended leave. The junior employee who allowed her entry resigned within the week. It was February 19th, 2021, on a red dirt trail system carved through coastal scrubland northeast of Byron Bay, Australia. And by the time anyone understood what had happened, Britta Solon was already dead. Britta was 29, based in Melbourne, and ran a wellness-focused social media platform built over 4 years through confrontational content. Her brand was refusal of liability forms, of institutional rules, of what she regularly framed as corporate overreach in ordinary life. She had documented disputes with service workers across 3 countries, each one packaged as a personal victory. She arrived at the rental operation that morning with a camera rig already mounted to her chest. At the counter, she argued for nearly 10 minutes over the helmet requirement, told the staff it was illegal to compel a paying customer, demanded the employee's full name, and threatened a 1-star review. The staff held firm. Under direct supervision, she initially put the helmet on, then removed it before leaving the property after the requirement was reiterated. The helmet was later recovered, clipped to the rear cargo rack, unused, with the chin strap still at its factory setting and never adjusted. Witnesses confirmed an open can of alcohol sat in the front storage basket at the time of the incident. There was no documented observation of her consuming alcohol at the facility, and staff reported only noticing the container during post-incident review. A kangaroo in the mid-distance drew her attention. Witnesses roughly 80 yards away described her appearing to angle the quad toward the animal, though they were not certain she was actively accelerating hard in pursuit. The animal itself was already moving laterally across open scrub, intermittently pausing and then bounding again, which may have contributed to the perception of a target being tracked, rather than a casual pass through the area. The front wheels reached an eroded shelf before she had any reason to expect it, a drop of roughly 18 inches below track grade, concealed by dry grass and uneven shadowing from the late light. The transition was not marked by any visible change in soil color or surface continuity, making it effectively indistinguishable at approach speed. The front axle caught abruptly as the tires lost uniform contact with the ground. At speed, the forward momentum continued over the pivot point, compressing the front suspension fully in a fraction of a second and shifting the center of mass past stability. The machine pitched forward and rotated over its front axle, completing a partial forward somersault before coming down across her head and upper chest. The quad settled immediately after impact, its rear wheels briefly lifting and then dropping back into the dust. The engine idled for several seconds in an uneven rhythm before the automatic cutoff engaged. Fine dust continued to drift around the frame afterward, gradually settling over the handlebars and the surrounding scrub, while the kangaroo was seen to have already cleared the immediate area without altering its original direction of travel. The 2 witnesses reached her within a minute. There was no intervention possible. One of them called emergency services immediately. Paramedics arrived on site within 24 minutes. The coroner determined the cause of death to be catastrophic blunt force trauma to the skull with complete cranial vault fracture, traumatic brain injury with diffuse cerebral herniation, and compression injury to the thorax resulting in bilateral rib fractures, and severe internal cardiac injury consistent with blunt force compression. Death was near instantaneous upon vehicle impact. Blood alcohol was confirmed above the legal threshold for operating a motor vehicle. The rental operation was reviewed by the relevant regulatory authority. Staff were found to have followed protocol at every documented stage. The helmet was photographed at the scene, chin strap still at its factory setting, never adjusted.